The last EP made by SNTS is a massive piece of work. When I surpassed 5k subscribers and asked all of you what should be the special tutorial about, I got numerous requests about covering the You Won't Defeat Me EP. During at least 3 episodes of the Secrets of SNTS Hard Techno series, we will be recreating the Lethal Storm track starting today with atmospheric sounds. The whole recreation project can be downloaded by signing up on my Patreon page, and if you want to get your hands on more hard/industrial techno sounds and presets, you should check out my upcoming Serum preset and sample pack. Inspired mainly by artists like KRTM, Braxele or Ayakana, it will have everything you need to level up your hard techno productions. Sign up to my waiting list, download a demo version of the pack and get a discount to buy the full product once it's released. Since the Lethal Storm track relies on modulated noise a lot, let's teach you first how to properly make such a sound. While I do already have a video on how to make noisy textures, this time we will need a smoother sound. Let's get ourselves a new MIDI channel, onto which I will load the Serum synthesizer. In the MIDI clip, play a single note throughout the whole beat. For the sake of noise, a subwave that is by default loaded in the oscillator A obviously will not work, so I will turn off the oscillator A and enable the noise one. As of now, I will only raise its volume. The most important part of this sound is the movement that I create by automating a low pass filter. I'm going to go to the effects tab and place an appropriate filter there. Why I'm not using a filter from the OSC section? This filter will be later used to slightly distort the noise, and because I want an automated low pass filter to work precisely and properly, it must be placed at the very end of the processing chain. Let's change the filter type to a more aggressive one. A current low pass filter has the least steep curve, 6 dB of attenuation per octave, so when I tweak the cutoff frequency knob, nothing much changes. The rhythm will be more audible if the filter becomes more aggressive. I'm dragging an LFO tile towards the cutoff frequency knob to assign the modulation. I will set the modulation range to be large. This will make drawing the rhythm easier. I want the LFO to always start from the beginning, and I want it to cycle infinitely, so the LFO mode should be set to trigger. All that's left is to draw a modulation curve, but before that I will turn down the modulation speed. To draw rhythms precisely, I increase the grid size and use the left Alt key while dragging a point to snap it to the grid. Take your time to create an interesting rhythm, as this is very important in such style of techno. I want that noise to become more alive, so I will decrease the modulation range and increase the filter resonance. To smooth out the modulation curve, I can use the smooth knob. It works a bit like the dry wet control for the LFO. A single filter might not be enough to create an interesting sound, so now I will use a second one from the OSC section. I also want a second filter to add some distortion, so once I route the noise oscillator to it, I'm picking a scream bandpass type of filter. I turn up the cutoff frequency knob and assign the same LFO to control it. I want that filter to be more aggressive too. Besides just turning up the filter resonance, I will also use the drive and scream knobs to make the sound more rough. Before I make the sound fuller with more effects, I can return to the noise oscillator to either pick a different noise sample or to change its pitch. In the effects section, I will use 2 extra effects to make the noise sound fuller. But before that, let me advertise myself quickly and just say that if you wish to have other sound design or music production subjects explained in such an easy and practical way, consider going onto my website to learn more about my private music production lessons. Free consultations are available as well. At first, I will use the chorus that will easily add a modulated background and some stereo width. To hear the adjustments better, I will temporarily increase the mix knob. The 3 most important controls that give the biggest change in the sound are the modulation rate, modulation depth, and feedback. The modulation depth by default is set to maximum, so I will only adjust the 2 remaining controls to make the chorus more intense. A chorus has its own filter that can remove either high or low frequencies out of the signal. Because our noise is going to fill mainly high frequencies area, I naturally don't want the filter to remove them. I will crank the filter cutoff knob up. The last parameters are the delay 1 and delay 2 that add a fixed offset in milliseconds to the chorus signal. Because these often don't change much, I recommend tweaking these knobs right in the end. Since I temporarily increased the mix control in the beginning, I will lower it now to blend the effect better. The second effect that will fill the sound is the delay. As with the chorus, I will temporarily turn the mix knob high. I begin the adjustments with setting up a good rhythm with delay time controls. Because I want the rhythm to be simple, I will use the same delay time for both left and right channel. For more stereo widths, the delay repetitions can be panned to the left and right thanks to the ping pong delay mode. The filter section is a bandpass filter that removes both low and high frequencies from the delay signal. I will use that section to make the repetitions sound lighter. I will be cutting mainly lower frequencies. At last I tweak the number of repetitions with the feedback and blend the effect with the mix knob. Let's see how can I equalize this noise. I will play it along with the finished kick and rumble sound that will be covered in another part of this tutorial series. First things first, for safety reasons, I will add a high pass filter to make sure I don't have any low frequencies in the noise. Now what is most important is that the noise isn't warm enough. I want to boost low mid frequencies, and to be more precise, I am suggesting a frequency area from 300 Hz to 800 Hz to emphasize. I have already prepared 2 bell filters for that purpose. I can also make that noise more hissy or let's say annoying. For that, I recommend boosting the 2 kHz area. That's the job for the second filter in EQ8. We have already added some stereo widths with, for example, chorus in Serum, so if I want to make that noise even wider, I can use now the utility and its width control. And right in the end, the volume adjustment. The second sound we will create today is an eerie pad that reminds a bit a choir. For that kind of sound we will need two important elements. The first one is a right wavetable. Instead of a saw wave, I will use something from the vowel category. Since it has to be a pad sound, I want it to be smooth and wide. A typical thing is to use unisono voices. Let's make the oscillator A play 4 such waveforms. Each one will have a slightly different pitch. If I want that sound to remind of a choir even more, I can add a second important element, that is a 4-man filter. Such filters emphasize a lot certain frequencies to mimic a human voice. Such filters are found in the MISC category in Serum. To alter the sound of that filter, make use of the cut-off and 4-man knobs first. To fine-tune the sound, I will increase its resonance and volume, and use the mix knob to blend this filter better. I mentioned earlier that our sound needs to be eerie. To get that effect, I'm going to use the filter from the effects section once again. In the MISC category, we can find a ring modulator filter type. That sounds a bit similar to the classic frequency shifter effect. The only parameter that adjusts and makes sense is the cut-off frequency knob. It will dictate the character of the sound. The sound could be more narrow in the stereo field. Since I have used unisono voices in the OSC section, I can go now to the global tab to reduce the width of the sound coming from the oscillator A. When I play the melody in the MIDI clip, you can notice the pitch changes immediately. I would like the pitch change to be long and smooth. In the Serum, the last thing I will do is enabling the glide at all times with the always switch and setting the glide time. There are a few things outside of Serum that I need to do to make the pad sound fuller and more choir-like. At first, let's fill the sound with reverb. Also, this isn't going to be just a reverb. I will create a parallel processing rack into which I load a hybrid reverb onto the second chain. Before I forget about it, I will set the tri-wet to 100%. Now, inside of a hybrid reverb, I will use only the algorithmic part of the reverb. I want to use the shimmer algorithm because it's the only algorithm that gives me the possibility to lower the pitch of the reverb itself. That's something similar to the shifter effect in Ableton or the isotope dynamic delay effect. I will use the pitch knob to make the reverb lower than the dry pad. Let's fine-tune the reverb now. At first, the shimmer knob can make the pitch shifting more or less audible. I will increase the damping to make the reverb sound darker. To make the reverb seem bigger, increase the size parameter. Because the current reverb seems too long, I will shorten it with the decay. To add more resonance to the reverb, decrease the diffusion parameter. With values close to 0, the reverb will start reminding more of an echo. For a simpler sound, I will also remove any modulation of the reverb by setting the modulation to 0. At last, I will use the stereo knob to adjust the width of the reverb. This pad requires lots of equalization, and we are going to cut mainly low and mid frequencies. As before, I will play along our kick and rumble as a reference point. So, the first filter will be an aggressive high-pass filter. This pad sound has some frequencies that give a very hollow sound. They are somewhere in between 500 Hz and 700 Hz, and to remove them completely, I'm using on these 3 bands a notch filter. I think the pad is too bright. To make it sound darker, I'm not only using a 6th band to cut a whistle sound that is often in between 2 and 3 kHz, but I'm also using a high shelf filter on a 7th band. I can also use a low-pass filter to get rid of the frequencies that give the air to the sound. At last, to make the pad more present in the mix, I'm boosting 1 kHz area.